your wisdom, and we will do the same. So I want to welcome you, Kader. Make sure I say your last name appropriately. Could you say it for me?
Yeah, it's Kader Sakkaria, entire name. Yeah,
Kader Sakkaria. Okay. So I just came back from India.
that's awesome. How was your trip?
It was phenomenal. I have just never come across just the most amazing, wonderful people that just took us in like family. I mean,
That's awesome. That's
all
awesome.
through India. They couldn't do enough. They just couldn't do enough. I felt like a movie star. It was, so it was really, really, really phenomenal.
That's
So,
awesome. Glad.
okay, so let me introduce you. I've got a bit of your bio here. As a senior technology executive with over 20 years of experience, Kadar has had the privilege of being the visionary behind multiple enterprise-wide transformation initiatives in financial services and other industries. He's known for providing innovative insight to navigate rapidly changing environments. Could we say that we are in a rapidly changing
Right.
environment? Resolve complex business challenges and digitally transform multinational organizations. As an energetic and passionate leader, he's achieved world class results by building cohesive teams, which we're going to want to talk about, and championing cultural change towards a customer centric mindset, turning challenges and change opportunities into global corporate success. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to you. And this is now, we call Under the Hood is the name of this podcast. And so it's a little bit of a different kind of business podcast because we like to get under the hood, like, how did you really become who you are? Many times I hear young people say, oh, they're just lucky. And you and I know,
It's, maybe there's a five
yes,
percent luck, but like there's 95% hard work that goes into it.
exactly. So, because the world is in such turmoil and conflict is everywhere, we have inner conflict, we have conflict in families, we have family conflict in teams and relationships, and between countries and organizations. So, how we manage this, the way I like to say it, I did a TEDx talk 2 years ago, and it was, I said, patterns that are created in childhood impact us as grown-ups. So tell us a little bit about your background, your family background.
Absolutely. Thank you, first of all, Tina, for having me in your podcast. Really honored and humbled to be part of this great under the hood session. So I actually, come from India originally. So that's where I was born, brought up. Was a family of five in ours, actually family of six, because I always kind of considered my twin brothers of one because they both look alike. They look like twins. I always joke around about that as well. And came from a very poor family,
Mhm.
struggling to kind of keep our ends meeting, because my dad came from a pretty large family. Because in those days, like he was one of 15, and my mom was one of
Wow.
16. So
Wow.
culturally, what they had to do is if you're the male in the family, then you have to make sure all your sisters are married before you get married. So he did
Yes.
have a little bit of a late marriage in his life. So he spent a lot of his time on that, and then he had to struggle to mate. But like you said, like you learn a lot during your
Mm.
younger days, and there's experiences ends up shaping you like you don't even believe it, right? Like and it
Yes.
becomes more of a subconscious kind of pattern of behavior. We always talk about this muscle memory. That's what it does, right? It actually comes in, and it becomes a good character building exercise as well, like as you go through the
Hmm.
type of filtering. Because I keep telling my family, which is my wife, she's a school teacher, and I have three kids. So one is in medical school, the other one is she's just a fresh person in the first year of college, and then I have a freshman in high school. So
Wow.
two daughters and a son. And I keep telling them is your thought process, right? Like ends up going through a filtration process, and those filtration
Hmm.
process. It's almost like your sediment rocks. It kind of gets built over a number of years. And
Yes.
how, like anything you put through that filtration process, you need to have, a good, character building thing that needs to come out of it. So it's important as you learn lessons in your life to kind of build those sediments of filtration in a good way, right? Like, so that
Yes.
helps you to look at your overall decision making in a whole different perspective. So that's how it works. So that's my family. So we live in Illinois, and my wife is an interesting path. So she was an attorney by trade, like she was practicing attorney, and then we had a situation with my son. So she had to switch, and so she's now a special ed teacher
Oh,
in
good for her. That's
so,
my background, special ed.
yeah. And
That was my first degree.
you know what? I actually have to thank all of you, like specifically, thank you for you doing that, because I can just see the impact those teachers actually create in those kids' life, right? Like it's just amazing. I sit in a board of a not-for-profit organization called Little City, which is helping both kids and adults with
Mm.
autism to kind of get them back into work, right? Like,
Oh, how
how do you
beautiful.
coach them? How do you work them? And I'm telling you, every time I go there, just such an amazing kids and adults that, like, they're just so loving. They're just like, and they're so smart. Like, it's amazing. Like how,
Yes. Oh, yes, they are.
right? Like it's just, and I keep kind of sort of thinking, man, like if I can actually do this in my life, like imagine the level of brilliance these kids and these adults have. Like
Yes.
they would, will be very successful in life as well.
So I'm going to bring you back a little bit because I love this. I love this. I love where you're going with it and the heart that you have. So let me ask you this: what kind of behaviors did you develop as a youngster? Okay, that has impacted your success today. And then I'm going to ask you another one behind that.
Sure, and I'll kind of give you a story that I went through, and what it kind of helped and why it helped to kind of stay, because one of my biggest passion is about customer centricity, as you were talking about
Mm-hmm.
profile.
Mm-hmm.
How do you create that experience for your own customers, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
and help them to kind of deliver that kind of experience is very important. Like and so in specifically on the digital world that we are trying to do, and a lot of times, like, you have so many customers you don't even see, but then how do
Right.
you create that wow experience with them? It's going to be an important part. One of the things that happened in my very early in life was, so me and my dad, for us, our routine was about like 4:30 in the morning. We have to take a bunch of plants, and like in India, it's very a tropical climate. I'm from deep south
Mm-hmm.
India. So we used to sell coconut plants. So we used to take the coconut plants in our head to the train station every day. So our routine is like 4:30 to 6:30. You go sell it, and once then you come back home, and then by 8:30 I have to be in a convent school. So I actually studied in a Catholic school in India, so it's
Mm-hmm.
right, like, so you have to be in there at 8:30. Well,
Whoop, whoop, whoop.
you're in trouble. You're in trouble. Right? Um, so the things that we used to do is like they used to be almost like, and in India, railroad system is one of the pretty largest railroad systems
Mm-hmm.
in the world that you have, and it had bunch of different like train tracks that you actually look, and it was always a hit and miss. So my dad and I used to split, and we'll go in different places and try to sell the plants, and if you're lucky to sell, then that's good. That means we can have our food that day or meal that day. But then if we don't, then it's go back to
Mm-hmm.
work, go back to school again. Over a period of days, right, I started kind of finding a little bit more culturally. There's this train that actually goes to a different city, and pretty much most of them are like devotees of that God, that they actually go and like to kind of pray and come back.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the famous God, like that's in India, and and I started kind of understanding there's this pattern, because they always trying it's always one of the jam-packed trains that's in there, and then and people are all willing to spend money because they're carrying money, because to kind of being a
Right.
devotee of that God, and they want to get some blessings, so they actually like to go do that. And through that process, I've started talking to a few people and like, what do they do, and what do they go, and like, how do they kind of look at getting their blessings, right? One other thing they were telling us, like, well, we go and give a share of some of their earnings that they have, or things that they've actually built or produced. They actually like to go and give it as as a way to to the God, and then like that kind of encourages and gets some blessing. So then I started connecting the dots a little bit, right? Like saying,
Right.
11 years old, trying to learn and kind of like trying to
This
get.
is the entrepreneur that's in you. Yes.
That's right. That's right. Trying to sell, um, and you're trying to learn as well, right? Like I even learned that language because sometimes some of the people go there, speak a different language, and
Right.
picked up languages, some of the words here and there. I started talking to them, and then it just started when you started connecting, right? So what they're talking about is just going and basically giving some of the things to the God, because that's what they are kind of really into it and love the God, and they want to get more blessings. Now they always were talking about money or some of the kind of materials that was one time given.
I bet I know just where you're going.
Exactly, right? So then I was talking to them about, like, it connected the dots and said, okay, here, so you're trying to go and you are trying to get some blessings from the God. Now, how come it actually becomes a way it keeps coming back and again and again and again in more of a repetitive mechanism? So the blessing becomes more bountiful rather than just like one
Right.
time and you have to
So
keep.
the coconut became
Exactly, right? So then that's what I talked about the plants. Now you can go and take the plant, and then there's different areas they used to let you plant those. So imagine them growing up and they yielding more coconuts, and that basically
right,
helps become like more as revenue stream for that temple as
right,
well, potentially. And then it also is something that just keeps bearing fruits, like year after year after year. And coconut trees, by the way, they last like 30, 40 years sometimes.
right, right, right.
After the first 3 to 5 years, they start bearing fruits, and you can just keep having it. And it became a very good strategy, right? Like, and I was able to, like, rather than trying to do a hit and miss every
Hmm.
day, then I go there, I have my kind of like the speech kind of, and the marketing strategy ready to
Right.
go and talk to them, share them with this. And then I was able to consistently start building a revenue stream out of that, right? So
Okay. So that was the genesis,
exactly.
right, of your
Right. So
understanding. So let me ask you another question. What were some of the other patterns that you might have created that didn't work so well for you, that you had to really kind of do some self, introspection and maybe make some shifts?
see,
Tell us about that.
absolutely right. Like, so one of the things that like I, have, and I learned, and I'm still learning as well, is how do you actually manage your overall team, right? Like that's an
Hmm.
important part, because that is just not a structure helps to a certain point, but it's more than the IQ, it's the EQ part of it, right?
Hmm. Right.
So in early part of my careers, I was more structured, and I was like, we need to get this done, and this is what, and I had the same messaging to everybody, right? Like,
Hmm.
I was
Hmm.
talking, rather than trying to understand the different personality in the team and being able to kind of communicate to them based on what they're coming from as well, right? And
Right.
the way I actually learned it was one day I was actually sitting. I was a new manager. I was all kind of excited about managing people and driving, and I'm all about, okay, we need to have this outcome, this output needs to be done. Let's just go.
Right.
Let's just go.
Right.
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 Right. Kind of going through it. And so I ran into one of our support person, and like she was talking to me about, well, I want to move into the development area. I'm like, okay, why? Like, there's a work that you're trying to do, and and there's value that you're trying to do and bring to our customers. And then she's like, well, I'm just basically fixing bugs, and like this is something that I have to work on second shift, and I don't create any value. Then it started helping me to start reflect back,
Hmm.
like, what, like, hold on, right? Like, why does she feel the way she feels? And like, because
Hmm.
I'm just having a structure, I'm saying each one of you is supposed to do this, and I'm kind of trying to drive the same message. Then it helped me to learn, right? Like, she was adding significant value, right? Like, one of the areas that we were doing was we were sending financial aid letters to, students who are just
Hmm.
got admitted into colleges. So having that, like, if she doesn't manage and monitor it, that means we're not going to get the financial aid letters on time to these students, which is
Hmm.
changing for them, right? Like for them, their parents, and all that. So able to kind of basically adapt the message of the value that they're creating, right? Like, so two pieces. I was always talking about outcome, business value, but I had to kind of learn that EQ portion about how their experience or their work
Right.
enhances this business value, right? And how critical it
Hmm.
is to the business value. It's tying that component was one that I had to learn through and kind of fine tune myself a little bit. And I'm still fine tuning, by the way. It's like,
Yeah. This is not an easy thing, right?
that is right.
Because what you mentioned is you were appreciating how people need to feel valued, right? And then there's the other piece of what are the things that are really your strengths, and what are not your strengths,
That's right.
right? And so having to be able to, it's very complex. People are
Absolutely.
complex.
Absolutely, Tina. Because see, the main thing is, there's so many different flavors that you need to have of characteristics within the teams, right? Like, so that's what
Hmm.
you need to kind of focus on. Because if all of us are in a certain personality, it is just going to create more of tug of war. So one of the lessons learned on that, like that experience for me, was every time whenever I come in, either I'm building a new team or I've actually taken over a team, I like to kind of understand, right? Like, how well we
Hmm.
are, right? Like, is all the team completely analytical, or is it all emotional, or is it kind of like structured? Is it unstructured? So you need to have a combination of those, because
Correct.
you need to have some people who are visionary, who can understand, who can drive. Like, you need some folks who are like into that kind of architecture, the mechanics,
Hmm.
analytics behind it. You need some of the folks who are like builders. They love building things, right? You need somebody who are operators, who like to kind of operate and manage. So you need to build that structure and kind of have that cohesiveness across the teams to kind of be able to with a certain objective. So that's one of the key things that I always look for, like, in teams. Like, I had a situation where I was, a CTO was asked in, and they said, hey, this team does great work engineering wise, but they can't deliver anything, right? Like,
Hmm.
not kind of given anything. And when I looked at and researched, the whole team was more analytical and that visionary, but there was no operators, right? So there was nobody in there kind of thinking about how do we get this out? Like, how do we create that experience? So it's that's an important part, like you said. Absolutely.
Yes, 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 yes. So let me ask you another question. We say a lot of times that we learn the most from our greatest, what we consider failures. But again, I consider a failure something if you don't learn something from it. What one of your biggest struggles that you really had to kind of look at and overcome, that has then become for you a great success?
So, let me kind of talk about why empathy is important. Like, there's a story behind it as well, right? And that, a biggest lessons learned in my life, right? So when I was young, like I was talking about, like, we were not that, we were poor, right? Like, I can't even say we were rich, like we were poor at the time. And one of the key things were my dad's brother were doing extremely well. So they were like, doing extremely well, like, in their life and how their business is. And they used to have this business. I used to go and support them on the weekends so I can actually make some money as well, right?
Hmm.
Part of supporting onto it. And what I learned during that process was how not to treat people, right? Like, when you
Mm.
don't, because that was more of, there was a status, right? Like, where they were much higher status, we were not. So the way
Hmm.
I was getting treated, and even like the way they used to give food, and in like they'll give it a plate in the floor, they'll be sitting on a table and eating and all that stuff. So that basically created a level of empathy, right? Like, it doesn't matter, like, how successful you are. You always have to kind of understand the steps that you actually came through, and then focus on building that, with the
Hmm.
next generation. How do you actually build that, right? So that empathy and education is the one, like, that actually learned from my failure, where I was kind of treated a certain way because we were
Right,
not,
right.
that helped
I do
me.
understand in India there is a caste system that is very,
Right,
very difficult to get beyond, correct?
right, that is right.
Yes.
things have changed now dramatically, but and this is, I mean, I'm kind of rewinding myself about 30 years ago and some of the
Mm-hmm.
failures in life, right? Like, but we've also had some, at least in my professional careers, like I've actually had situations where we've had some pretty significant, project failures as well, right? And
Mm-hmm.
if you take a look back and kind of understand, there's always two key things stand out, right? Like, so one is that value that we are trying to create, that, whether it's a
Mm-hmm.
business value or is it like operational value, it doesn't matter which side of the puzzle, or it's a growth
Mm-hmm.
value that we are trying to create, but understanding that, right? And being able to translate that into what you're trying to build, right? Like, that
Mm-hmm.
one of the areas that stands out like for failures is not understanding the value. And second is the team kind of like, understanding the experience, right? Like that the
Right.
customers are looking for. And a lot of times, like, you don't do, because the modern days we are focused on persona based kind of experiences, but like when you rewind, 10, 15 years ago, the persona based experience was not there, right? Like in a lot of projects where
Mm-hmm.
6 months, 8 months, let's just basically understand the first month what it is. We go lock ourselves for 5 months, get the work, and then come back. We are like, oh, that's not what I wanted, right? So that's helped change the new agile ways of working and all that
Right.
came in. So from a professional side, that's the failures that I've had a couple of major projects where we did not understand the business value for our customers, and then we had to kind of shut the project down. And there was one of the key things that helped me to do from that is to start looking at business value, right? Whether it's operational growth, or efficiency at play, plus like, how do you actually create that customer centric experience for each one of them, basically was
Right.
the things that
So
got.
it's not one or the other.
It is not. It is both. It's a combination of those, right?
Right.
You can create value, but if you're not creating the experience, it's going to be a short-term piece rather than longer-term, like adoption.
Right. Right. So we have a couple more minutes, and you've sort of connected some of the dots on some of this stuff. But being a leader in a high pressured profession has many, many challenges. And you've talked a little bit about what's the biggest challenge that you face, you think, when it comes to managing conflict and or people or leading people?
So that's a great question, right? Like, so the key area that I would say is, you know, managing people, we all have, right? Like, there are people who actually like to manage, some people don't like it, but in respect, I actually like that management structure because you're able to generate value from each of the different team members. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what you always find in a lot of times is, um, there's a level of egoism comes into play with a lot of the team structures. Like, how do you
Mm-hmm.
actually kind of take them beyond that egoism to kind of look at it? We are all humans. We end up having, if we don't have ego, then we are not humans,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
One component. But like what happens a lot of times is people actually get into the politics of their own kind of silos rather than looking at the outcome that we are trying to generate, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
that we are trying to create with our customers. Having kind of pulling that together and having the team understand. So for me, even on my current team structures, anytime when somebody comes to me and says, "Well, I can't work with this person, I don't want to answer," my immediate reaction is like, "Okay, let's take the personality stuff off for a second. What are they asking, right? Like, oh, they're asking me to do this work, and so why can't you do that? Because I have a different structure. Okay, have you explained that to them? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
they should know. But my point is, have you explained it to them, right? Like, do they know
Mm-hmm.
why you're doing what you're doing? Um, okay, maybe, okay, fine, I'll do it. Once they go and have that discussion and talk about it, then the perspective changes because then you're actually sitting and talking about the customer experience you're trying to create. What's the outcome? What are we trying to do, right? Take
Mm-hmm.
go off and then focus on what you're trying to come out of it makes a significant difference within and managing the team. And so that's what I actually take pride on in trying to talk to teams about the value and the client centricity, right? Like tying that
Right.
back together is to focus on what are we trying to achieve and not focus on the egos or the silos or the political, because politics is going to exist in every organization, right? Like, I'm not going to say sit here and say it'll be eliminated, it's going to be part of it, but
Right.
even with politics we can create value, right? Like, and the value is
Right.
going to be based, we are all getting towards a certain experience, a certain outcome that we are trying to work with our teams and
Right.
having
So
that.
so that's a strategy right? That you have developed over the years, right?
Yep.
Works
Yes.
pretty well sometimes.
So the thing is, it takes time, right? Like, so a lot of times what happens is, Tina, it's like you have to have your relationship that you need to build with each of the team members, right?
Hmm.
Where they start seeing you in kind of sticking to that model, right? Like saying, hey,
Hmm.
it doesn't matter what role I'm playing, but if I can actually create this business value for my customer and the type of
Hmm.
experience, I don't care what my title says, I'm going to do what it requires for me to kind of work on it
Right,
together, right?
right.
Once you set that up, it starts working, but it takes time, like, because
Yes,
there's a
it does.
level of trust building that needs to happen, right? Because
Yes,
that is,
exactly.
once they understand you to be one of their trusted advisor, then they will be willing to
Right.
follow you as well. And that's what the past, at least the few different jobs that I've done, the first 6 months, that's what I focus on, is building that capacity and capability. And
Hmm.
I tell my leadership, saying that, like, you need to give me that time, right? Like, yes, we have to go and build. There's things that we have to do. And as you said, it's kind of an uncertain world right now, because the
Right.
value is, instant gratification is what people are looking for.
Right.
We need to make that impact and effort to work with the team to kind of build that trust, so that way they can actually help, you know, not you, but overall as an organization successful. There's one thing I'll tell you, and I'll stop after that. I always tell, right, like, if you're looking at, the company is the one that's paying your salary. It's not me as a manager, or it's not my manager who's paying you. It's the company
Hmm.
that's paying you. As long as you focus on that and then build value for the company, then
Yeah.
all these other politics doesn't matter. Like, we always think, well, like, because you work for Kader, like, I have got to operate this, and I work for someone else, I have to operate this. But once you take that barrier that, like, hey, the company is paying me to
Right.
create value, so then this is kind of all gone, and then you're able to break those kind of, what I would say, invisible barriers, and have them focus on what the value that needs to happen.
It's beautiful. It's really wonderful to listen to you, honestly, because you bring together so much of what I'm about and my company's about, and it really is connecting the head and the heart.
That's right.
And that's in your very subtle way, that's actually what you do. And it's a wonderful model.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
So I appreciate having you. We're just about out of time, and this is delicious. And I so appreciate your time, and I know it's valuable. But what you're sharing is really valuable as well. And people can listen to you. And is there any particular way, Kadar, that you want people to get in touch with you? We'll have everything kind of in our notes
Sure. Yeah.
and
Email, like, I have it's my first name dot last name at Gmail. It's kader.sakkaria@gmail.com. Or if people want to reach me through my cell phone, I'm open to that as well. It's 312-206-2818 as well.
fabulous. So you are very approachable.
Absolutely. It's a learning exercise, right? Anytime you talk to people, it's amazing, like, how much you can actually learn just in that discussion. And that's been the blessing for me, I would say, right? Like, is to be able to learn and listen and learn, right? That's the best way to
Awesome.
look at it.
Awesome. So thank you once again. And I appreciate you being here. And we're going to stay on for a little bit, and you and I are going to have a little chat just to kind of go over a couple things that we talked about, if that's okay
Absolutely.
with you.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you
Thanks
again,
so much.
Tina.
And anybody that's been with us live, I welcome any of your comments, and look for the replay because it's really, really great. Thanks. Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
So what did